ഹലോ ഫ്രണ്ട്സ്, എല്ലാവർക്കും നമസ്കാരം. ഈ ഒരു സെഷനിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കാനായി ഇവിടെ എത്തിയിരിക്കുന്ന നിങ്ങളെല്ലാവരെയും ഞാൻ ഹൃദ്യമായി സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുകയാണ്. എ വാം വെൽക്കം ടു ഓൾ ഓഫ് യു ടു ദിസ് സെഷൻ. I am very happy to be in conversation with Dr. Peggy Mohan. And the theme of this session is the history of India through its languages. And we will have a 1-hour conversation. And in the first 50 minutes, I will be conversing with Dr. Peggy. And it will be followed by a Q&A session. So this is the schedule that we have. And I would like to introduce Dr. Peggy. Dr. Peggy was born in Trinidad in Caribbean, and then she earned a PhD in linguistics from University of Michigan, and later she moved to India, and she has taught at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Jamia Millia University, and at present she teaches music.
No, I teach at Ashoka University now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is Dr. Peggy Mohan, and you all know Peggy's recent book, which was published in 2021. That book, Wanderers, Kings and Merchants, The History of India Through Its Languages. This book has been really wonderful and sensational, and this book has received immense acceptance among scholars and all other readers. So the second part of her book is The History of India Through Its Languages, and that is the same theme today we have. And before beginning the conversation, I would like to offer some preliminary comments regarding the theme. We are living in an age, or we are living in a context where there are some claims emerging, getting more strength and strength. There are claims that my language or our language is the parent language of all of your languages. Then there are the counter claims saying that no, it's not your language, it's our language that is more ancient and more older than your language. This stuff is going on, especially in a country like India. I believe Dr. Peggy completely disagree with this kind of argument, and she has a lot of to offer. So I would like to begin the conversation by simply asking a question regarding the context of writing this book. How did you reach into writing this book? Is it actually a culmination of your years of thinking regarding the Indian languages?
See, my earlier training was looking at languages in the Caribbean which are mixed, and they mixed in historical time, which is to say time that we have history records for, and we have a notion on how they come together. But all my time in India, of course, I have not lived in Europe, but you study French, Spanish, Latin, and so when you live in the West, I found that so many languages mix in the same way. And when I looked at languages in the north of India, and then of course I looked at Malayalam a little bit, I found a parallel thing going on where you had all these languages in North India that you say are so similar, but you can't understand one from another. And then there's one in the south of India which is similar to what English represents in Europe, which is to say it has its own character, but it has taken a lot of words from Latin. So this has taken words from Sanskrit. And in pretty much the same way English prefers to take nouns, Malayalam has taken nouns from Sanskrit. And I'm seeing the same pattern emerging, and over years you think, and then suddenly you say that I must write this, and the time finds itself, and you start to write, and you keep going back and fixing things as you get more information, and you start on this trail. Like, I did not know anything much about Malayalam when I had to start to write that chapter. I had a friend, and he would get onto WhatsApp audio with me and tell me how this is pronounced, and I'd say, oh yes, this I recognize, this is also there in Tamil, and I would begin to, and we would count words and say how many Sanskrit words in this sentence. So one suddenly found that one was able to go onto a dangerous, difficult path with difficult languages one didn't know, But like a doctor who you go to and he only knows that you've come to show him your lungs, he doesn't want to know about your heart. He does, or maybe, but not about your brain. And so I only know a few little things about the languages that I got into. And I think it's brave. You're walking in the dark through a forest. Anything can come and attack you, mainly linguists. It has not happened. So I am very, very astonished that all the things that I have speculated about Indian languages, nobody has shot me down as I walked on this path yet.
Okay. And a related question is, you have written that the recent ongoing genetic studies regarding the ancestry of Indians, how did these scientific investigations help you in forming your ideas?
See, I had these ideas in any case, but obviously there were no proofs. And in all of these languages in India, there were two strands. There was a matrilineal strand, which nobody talked about. But because in the Caribbean it is so recent, you know that there are men who come on migration, and it's almost always men. And we see it similarly in the history of Kerala, men coming, and women who are local. And the kind of mixing that happens is not random. You get a sense of the matrix, the matrilineal structure, which is a cement that holds the language together, the grammar. And you have the words that come in, pretty stones here and there, making a beautiful floor. But the point is, if it were not for the cement, you do not have a floor. You just have stones. So I found that it was a nice idea until while I was actually writing, the studies started coming out, and they were confirming that indeed, if you look at India's genetics through the mtDNA, which is to say the mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother's line, it is very smooth. Nobody has come to India in the last 15,000 years or something. Now that's not possible. So we know that people have come, but how is it not showing? And then when they started doing Y DNA studies through the patrilineal line, finding women have been here and men have come and met and married and had children who mix the languages in a very predictable way. So it was an exciting thought, and it led me to a further thing that migrants, deliberate migrants, usually are men. Women don't migrate easily until maybe the path is very clear. Like, I look the way I look because my father was a young Indian student in Canada, and going at a time when girls were not going. His sisters went in the end, but he went at an age when he was be looking for a wife, and there were no Indian women. So that's always happens with migrants, that men go first, they find local women, and you have what I called in the book a tiramisu bear. If you imagine a mix between a polar bear and a grizzly bear, with some features of one, some features of the other, but it's always the father who's the migrant and always the mother who's the local. And I thought the genetics is saying the same thing. And whenever I meet geneticists and we are comparing data, they say, no, you are talking about our data. I say, no, I'm talking about language. It is saying the same thing.
So essentially you are talking about the migration of Indo-European language speaking men, mainly men. But there is an argument, even among some scientists who are also behind these genetics. They are saying that it's not this kind of influx to India that happened. Instead, there took place a out of India migration. And these people migrating from India and spreading to Europe. Do you buy this argument?
No, I don't. For my own reasons, not about genetics. Well, genetics will confirm it. Every single Indian will have what's called the M haplogroup, which is the very first migration out of Africa. 70,000 years ago, people crossed out of Africa. Before they went anywhere near the Middle East and Europe, They've crossed at Somalia to Oman and Yemen and crossed and made their way by coast through India, continuing all the way to Australia and New Guinea. And we all have a gene haplogroup, which is the M haplogroup. It's in India. The only only people outside of India who have it are gypsies, who left about 1,000 years ago. And of course NRIs have it, but that's one. That's from the genetic side. But from our side, if you look at the map of India and you look at the kind of spread of words that have come in the north from Prakrits, in Kerala from Sanskrit directly. It's the only part of India that went directly to Sanskrit. But you are seeing it, if you imagine a volcano flowing, it flows in a direction, down a hill. It doesn't flow up. So if you're seeing the penetration of India going inwards and not outwards, that's a very strong sign that initially, if you count the first few hundred years, it's in the Indus Valley where a civilization had already ended, and then you have it spreading into the Kurukshetra area, then across the north of India, downwards into Maharashtra, and much, much later down into Kerala, a small group of people. You're seeing an inward penetration, which goes, and the other thing is India was never a place people left. It was a place people came to. And even in the time of the Mughals and the Sultanate, people came to India because it was the safest place to be. It was, apart from having a very good climate, it also was pretty well protected from invasions of other kinds. So out of India is never, I mean, people are mostly coming into India. Maybe now, in small numbers, people are going out. It's a nice thought, but I haven't understood why the Hindutva people are so keen to say that these were never people coming from outside, or that they came with no violence whatsoever, that they were calm, peaceful people. Because we have seen migrations in present day into Kerala, and we know what a peaceful migration looks like. People sit down and quietly learn Malayalam and don't change it in any way. But this is not what happened with the people who came in the Vedic migrations. They changed India.
So you have mentioned about the Indus Valley civilization, or it's called Harappan civilization. We have linguists, scholars, and scientists. I think they are all agreeing to the argument that the people who were living in that civilization, they have much affinity with the so-called Dravidian people. What's your take from the linguistic? What's your clues regarding the Indus language and the genetics or identity of the Harappan people?
Okay, we are not in a position to tell you the words of the language. Those have vanished. People have been trying to reconstruct them. What we can tell, and this is what I am about to write on now, so I'm working on it. It's like in quantum mechanics, you can either tell where this particular electron is, but then it will not be there after, or you can tell its trail in a much more undefined way. I prefer to go with the trail and to see not the surface of the language, the words, what it sounded like, but the internal structure of the language. So if you look at the languages of the Northwest, all the way in what we call the Indus Valley periphery, which goes down into Maharashtra and across to the Ganga Jamuna, where it comes together, that is the whole periphery of the Indus Valley area, where all the languages are quite similar. They all have gender, for example. Nowhere else in India has gender. They have very strange past tenses, which if anybody has tried to learn Hindi, you have discovered that all of a sudden the object has become the subject, and you don't know what to do and which gender it goes to. And that's not so in the South, that's not so in the East. So the question is, if you look at the modern languages of North India, if you look at the surface and you want to say, how do you say in the house? you will say in Hindi, ghar mein. Now, it sounds a lot like the Sanskrit grihe, except that grihe, that A ending is a case ending, which we don't have case in Hindi at all. But if you take away the word, the surface word, and you get the Malayalam sentence, which it becomes vetil. Am I correct? Now, the fact that il is separate, is me is separate, you get the structure is lining up with Tamil and Malayalam, and not with Sanskrit. But the word on the surface is lining up with Sanskrit, which is confusing, because if you're only looking at words, you'll say Hindi has come from Sanskrit. Not really. I mean, ghar and griha are not identical. There obviously is a Prakrit somewhere in the middle, but the structure, the way the cement that puts the language together is about 85% the same from Tamil and Malayalam to Hindi. And there's a 15% we haven't accounted for. I don't know what it is. My guess, and I have to know a lot more, and it's possible we will never know, is was there more than one kind of Dravidian who came into India in that migration? One of them was not hostile to the idea of gender and funny past tenses, and one came all the way south and with the kind of languages you know now. So 85% is lined up from north to south. But 15% is not accounted for. But Sanskrit is just a very superficial topping which gave words. And words, as we will discover, is a very male thing. Men donate words, like they donate sperm. But the uteruses that give the new life are female, and that always comes from the older language of the area. So it's possible, 85% is not a small number to say that the north and the south line up.
Ma'am, when we look at the Dravidian languages, most of the major Dravidian languages are confined to the southern part of India. What would have been the historical reason for this, why these languages are confined to a particular geographic location? Especially the majority of the Dravidian languages like the Malayalam or Telugu. So what would be the historical reason for confining of these languages into this part of the country?
Yeah, but your earlier question said that it's possible that all of us are Dravidian in the north also. So the question is, what is the difference between the northern people who have a Dravidian background and the southern people? And the difference is only the words, mainly the words. Some elements of grammar, of course, that 15% which is different, where gender and thing comes in, which is there in the north. But if we are essentially the same, 85% the same, then it just simply is that the further you go from the northwest, the more likely you are to find preservation of something that is older. So the Dravidian words would have vanished from the north, but not the grammar. Okay. So again, that lava flow inwards into India from the Vedic people and the Prakrits and their kingdoms and so, which did not touch the south, but touched the south partly. I mean, Malayalam is more touched than Tamil. So you're getting an actual geographical spread of the kind of inflow into India, and it's all consistent. Normally, people, until governments come and make states in India, it's a much more continuous area. In fact, if you look at the south of Maharashtra and the north of Maharashtra, the south is much more Dravidian, even with the words from the north. It's more visible. So you're seeing a whole continuum of how Dravidian in the sense of like sentence structure, where if you're making relative clauses, the sentence is flipped the other way from how it is in the north. The south of Maharashtra, it's flipped. North of Maharashtra, it's north. So you're seeing a long history in geographical spread.
When we read your book, a main argument is that the book talks about the retroflex feature. You are saying that it's only the Indian languages or subcontinental languages having the retroflex feature. Okay, so could you please talk about that?
Yeah, I got into some trouble because some Norwegian said to me, we also have t and t in Norwegian, and I'm really, really sorry to hurt your feelings that, okay, you're not from India, but you are a real outlier. There are two places which talk of it, Norway and Georgia in the Caucasus. And they say it's very important there. But if you look at the map, and I drew a map because it's the easiest way to teach in a class. If you look at the people who came from Africa via the Oman and Yemen route, they left a part of Africa which has the t and d. It does have it. I don't know how significant. Ethiopia, there are a number of small languages. Somalia have it. Then there's a population replacement in the Arab world. Yemen and Oman don't have it. The whole of South Asia has it. But if you think that that's or the Andaman Islands, which have not been in contact with the mainland, they have t different from th and d different from the. And I know particular words where to make that distinction, you're getting a different word altogether. Now that's fine, it is only this part, but if you go further, if you listen to Australians, first Australians speaking, if you hear them talking behind you, you think they're talking Tamil. And because there's the la, there's the na, there is t and d. They don't have the th and the. That is unique to the northern part of the subcontinent. So you're seeing the whole line of people going out of Africa, and maybe not Norway is something different, it could have happened. The human mouth is the same everywhere. We all have the possibility of saying t and th, but it's just that it's been exercised in this particular migration out of Africa, going all the way into Australia and into the middle of New Guinea, which has the same people from the first migration. The coastal areas of New Guinea have new population, they don't have it. But so if you look in India also, you see big differences from part to part as how much there is. Like you have a la in Malayalam, but you have it in even Gujarati and Rajasthani, but not as often. So, and the other thing is that you have a lot of these sounds in the north, but not as often as you get them in the south. The same sounds. In fact, my greatest fun, I make my students learn Kutanadan, Punjayele, so they can see how often it comes in a southern language, rather than just simply being there. And of course, we have extra ra. What is the story of that? Who knows the answer? How old is it? It is unique to this part of India. Did it come up by itself? Is it a holdover? We don't know. So, but the idea being that this is a lovely way of tracing the migration out of Africa, the very first, before any migration went into Europe. And if you want to ask what the first people into India did, we don't know anything else, but they had t and d, and t and d.
We were actually discussing about the retroflex feature. So when did actually the Sanskrit, and your Professor Madhav Deshpande has pointed out that the earlier Sanskrit didn't have this feature, and later it was incorporated from the languages of the people who were earlier inhabitants in the country. So when did Sanskrit incorporate this?
Okay, that's a two-part question, because when you talk of Sanskrit, you talk of two things. These people who came in were talking to each other day by day, and they were also composing a Rig Veda. That is two different things. So if you come to India and you immediately marry a local person, the child grows up first speaking until the age of 5 the mother tongue, and then starts looking at Sanskrit. You get a whole bunch of people, including the wives, including intellectual men from, educated men from the local people who approach the language, and they bring I hear it all the time. Every time I hear Sanskrit words in Malayalam, I hear how the Prakrits came, because the words in the Veda, when pronounced, the different Sandhi rules that come from knowing Malayalam, from what would have been there in Sandhi, so, in Sanskrit. So these people would have brought it in. The children were already 50% mixed, maybe more than 50 after some time. So the spoken Sanskrit would have probably got retroflexion almost at once. But the Rig Veda did not get it initially. So there's some feeling that these children knew, just like Mughal children knew in Persian you don't have it, but in Urdu you have it. You know, Pahad is a mountain in Urdu, but they would not have a ra in Persian. That was okay. But Sanskrit was never written. It was memorized. So they composed the Sanskrit in a slightly modified version without all the na. Na was not even supposed to be there. Ra was not there at all. And left it like that for some time. And over the period of between 500 and 700 years, when the first empire came to take back all these hymns, to record, to write them, no, you can't write them down, to memorize them. They memorize them with the accent of people. Imagine yourself trying to pronounce Sanskrit. They were pronouncing it like you. Like the opening line of the Rig Veda, Om Agni Mirle Purohitam. And the love to start with is a South Indian influence because it was retrieved from this area. Everywhere else it was lost. Purohitam became Purohidam, which you would do that anyway. And North Indian, any Indian would go, not Agni Mirle, they would go Agni Mirle. Close, very close. So you start seeing these kinds of things sneaking into it very early. And by the time they retrieved it, and they sat and had arguments, what is this man saying? This doesn't make any sense. They incorporated a more recent version of Sanskrit, which by then, 500, 700 years later, had adopted Dravidian Sandhi rules here and there, and or the as different from the and the. So it took for the Rig Veda hundreds of years, but for spoken Sanskrit, which we don't know much about, it must have been immediate.
So now I have a big question for you, and so many people have tried to answer this question, and this question is, who were the early Indians? Dr. Tony Joseph tried to attempt to answer from a genetic perspective. So I would like to ask, who were the early Indians? And we just talked about the retroflex feature, getting into Sanskrit, and this came from the existing languages. And am I able to say that this language was a kind of Proto-Dravidian language?
No, according to the geneticists, the Dravidians came a long time ago, but not that long ago. 10,000 years is nothing compared with 65,000 years. So the first, and they were not the first people. Even before Homo sapiens got to India 65,000 years ago, he couldn't spread in India because or men and women, they couldn't spread because there were already hominids here too. So this place has been a destination for a very long time, over 100,000 years, if you don't count, if you are going beyond just Homo sapiens. But the Dravidians, according to the geneticists, came approximately 10,000 years ago. That's a long time. But it's not the first Indians. The first Indians were a little closer to, no, I don't understand. They have been obviously changed in many ways, but the tribal people. And the tribal people in the north and the south have gone in different directions. The Andamans are unmixed, but how can you say that in 65,000 years they have not changed? I mean, we changed in 15 years. 65,000 years is way too long to think a language is going to hold still, except for having retroflexion. And I suspect that the one thing the Dravidians did is take this thing and enhance it, increase it a little bit. So that's part of why you get differences. But the Dravidians were the second, not the first. Maybe the third if you count the non-Homo sapiens.
Anyway, we have evidences for the waves of migration
Yeah.
into India. And when we talk about the migration, we have another set of migrations in the later part. I am talking about the migration of the Greek or the Parthians. So, what was their influence or impact regarding the linguistic landscape?
Probably not that much, because Persians did not come as Persians. Remind me that I have to talk about Persians. That is a very confused situation. The Greeks did not come in large enough numbers, but even so, all these people, once the word migrant must be used, you have to know they are men. I mean, very few Greek women came, maybe later, as a nice touch, you know, and some of them were military people too, so nice, but men. So that not enough. It's like how many Bengalis have come into Kerala? Not enough to make a difference, to change things. However, Persian is a funny thing. The Persians didn't come. Their language came. That is a different thing. It's like saying we are now all having this discussion in English, and not too much English genes in the room, and my genes are, whatever I may look like, probably not English at all. So we are speaking in English even though it's not genetically linked to us. In the case of Persian, the people who came in from Central Asia, the Delhi Sultanate, who went down into the Deccan, and the Mughals later, they brought Persian as a high language. The way we are using English now as a high language, they had something else. You have something else. But that something else tends to get lost. That something else in their case was Uzbek, not related closely to Persian at all. But if you were educated, you had to know Persian. Just as there's pressure in India, if you are educated, you have to be exposed in some ways to English. It's being pushed on you, even if it's not close to your own language. So that we have a history in India of people having a language to speak among themselves and a language to write in or be educated in. So Persians are a very interesting case where history has just repeated itself. What we are doing right now, me speaking to you in English, if they came and spoke, if they didn't speak English, these Central Asians, they got a nasty word for them. The Bengalis call them Uzbeks. So if you were an Uzbek and you didn't know Persian, you were really uneducated, like Ujbuk. So they were all Ujbuks, but some of them knew Persian. If you look at Babur's Baburnama, it's a mix. He's got his old language and he's got Persian for things like poetry and so. And he knew what he was, something similar to a Uyghur or an Uzbek.
In your studies, you are actually talking about the diverse heritage of our languages. But today, as I have initially pointed out, there are claims emerging and getting some strength. And there are saying that Sanskrit is the parent language of all other Indian languages. Then recently, there was a claim made even by people in the high office. They are saying Tamil is the oldest language. What's your take as a linguist? How do you see these claims?
Let me discuss Tamil first. The claims they make about it go back 4,000 years. 4,000 years is nothing. 4,000 years compared with 65,000 years, just get a sense that they are competing with the people from the Sentinel Islands who we don't meet. But what little contact there has been, they sound a lot like Andaman Islanders in their grammar and the words. So if Tamil, a part of the problem is that we think that a language is not a language until it is written. So obviously there are inscriptions in old 4,000-year-old Tamil, but inscriptions are like saying your clothes. You could change your clothes and be a different person, but you're the same thing. Linguists don't like to look at just written text unless that's all we have. The language is dead or it's old. But there are older versions even of Tamil that they can't touch because they're lost in the mist of time. And so first of all, so Tamil as it is now is not the oldest language in the world. It's very, very young. 4,000 years is nothing. And Sanskrit, I think there's some gender bending happening. If the people who came in speaking Sanskrit were male, it's not our mother tongue. It's maybe a kind of an uncle tongue because at least in the north, the root to the modern North Indian languages was not Sanskrit, it was the Prakrits. That's why Bengali does not look the same as Marathi, does not look the same as Hindi, does not look the same as Punjabi, because they came from different Prakrits. This is not directly Sanskrit. And that too is also the male line. You know, so for Sanskrit to be the mother of everything, it's not a mother, it's not a father, it's an uncle. It's the mother's brother, actually, because we all would like to think we have something to do with Sanskrit, but the truth is the languages that were going through the evolutionary process were a little different. Sanskrit was staying in wonderful frozen condition, locked in the Vedas, and that's not the same thing as saying alive, that's not the same thing as saying even a father, except in the case of Kerala, where it at the time of Mani Pravalam, words came into the language, but only words, and that too only nouns. Have you ever looked at literary Malayalam and counted the words and seen that you will not find very many words that are not nouns? That's a very, very gentle touch.
Coming down in history, by around 10th century, in the context of Indian history, regarding the language, we see the feature of the emergence of the vernacular languages, number of Marathi, so on and so forth. So, in that particular period of history, we see the emergence of these languages. What would have been the socio-political or cultural context which helped in the emergence of these languages?
Okay, this is something I can't put my head on a block about. We say they came at this time because we have written evidence. People not writing epics, but writing legal documents, stock lists, traders who had very different reasons for wanting things down in written form. So we have found those documents, but is that the oldest? I wish I knew, I wish I could say that how much older these languages are than that. Did they come up long before and we only have evidence of them in writing because towns were coming up? So here's the point. Under what conditions would this have happened? Movement of people, urbanization, and I think a less importance given to kings and priests. Suddenly people in business, trade became a little bit of important. I'm trying to explore now how much of this big change that happened in Indian languages was due to the presence and the conflict with Hindus and Buddhists. That Buddhists also shook up the entire area in a very big way. And when they came, of course, priests became less important. And the kings were not happy, but there were certain strata of society that were happy about Buddhism. And maybe you didn't have to be a Buddhist to have the feeling that my work is now very important, my crafts work, my business, my trading. So something happened around that time which we are able to uncover. Because previous to that, remember that the whole Sanskrit era, except for people like Ashoka with his pillars, they were obsessively not writing people. They didn't like to write things down. To this day, you'll get Sanskrit Pandits who will memorize an entire text. So that gives a big problem for those of us who want to see writing. Because we have to have writing, because when you're talking about 1,000 years back or 1,200 years back, you are otherwise only speculating. You're speculating that given how the language looks now, what we have seen, for example, with Hindi is little bits of scraps of information out of the Delhi region look like Hindi today. And so there's not been much change in Marathi, obviously Marathi is mixed in, there are many different varieties, but you don't get a sense that at the time of the year 1000, 12 or 1200, that the language was very different from now, and which is also part of the model, that languages, when they're doing well, they remain stable. They don't keep changing every day.
So we were talking about the regional languages. Today we are here in Thiruvananthapuram, and here Malayalam is the major language. I would like to ask you a point you have written in your book. That is, it seems an innovative argument, and the argument is Malayalam is the only Indian languages that have directly borrowed nouns. Malayalam is the only Indian language that directly borrowed nouns from the Sanskrit. So, could you explain on this? And when I have interviewed you, some people have written that no, this is not correct. We have Sanskrit in Tamil and Telugu more than Malayalam.
Yeah, the question is, at what point did this happen? Because there's a lot of Sanskrit in a lot of languages in India, but this is much more recent than when it came in. It was the first and quite a while back entry into Malayalam. But in Hindi, the bulk of the Sanskrit words came at the time of the British, where they were unhappy with Mughal influence being still in their face when they saw Persian words in Hindi and Urdu. They split the two languages, and then they went on this adventure trying to purge Hindi of Urdu words or Persian words and put directly Sanskrit, not knowing that that's not a northern thing to do, it is a southern thing to do in Malayalam. Because of that particular event, the epics being written in the 12th century here in Manipravalam. There is some Sanskrit in Tamil also, but that is often the same way as in the north, via the Prakrits. Like you even have some of those words in Malayalam also, which came a different route, the Sanskrit via Tamil. So it's a different story, but when the question of when it happened is crucial. If it happened very recently, like with Hindi and Marathi, then it's not the same thing. I could do it right now. I could put Sanskrit words into English, but it's not the same as capturing a historical moment when something was happening. Obviously, I need to know a lot more about the history of Kerala, what was happening in the 12th century besides language. Were there wars happening? Was there a change in some way? What was reflected in the fact that Manipravalam came then? You have to look outside of language for the answers to these things, because it has to do with politics, economics, kingdoms changing, Buddhism vanishing, people being reabsorbed into Hinduism, Islam coming very close to then, a little after, maybe not even a full century, or in Kerala even earlier. So all these things, you have to look outside of language. And one thing I learned in this book is I have to look at history. I don't know about everything, and not everything is written. Like I've been doing some work on the Andhra area. And nothing is written down, or it's written in patches here and there that I need to know about. You have to ask people, and you ask somebody in Bengal saying maybe it happened the same as it happened here. There's so much that you need to know that is not even there, and you have to go digging like a bloodhound to find it.
And you have mentioned about Hindi and Urdu. Today, when we encounter a child or youngster and saying him that the Hindi language and Urdu language were essentially the same, they would be wondering. They are seeing that the Hindi is another language and Urdu is another language, and there are some religious dimensions also. So when did this split happen? What was the context?
See, first of all, Hindi and the word Urdu did not come up until almost the end of the Mughal era. They called the language Hindi because they had to call it something. It was not an important language. They were doing their writing in Persian anyway. It's only around the time of Aurangzeb that they started actually writing in this thing. And as for the non-Muslims, they were writing in their own scripts, which was not Devanagari. And when the British came, they decided the same logic that, like Malayalam, Hindi should also have Sanskrit, it should also have Devanagari. It was pushed by a British order through the schooling system to split the two languages because they were capable of deploying a budget. This is for a Muslim school, they will learn Persian and they will learn Urdu. And this is for a Hindu school, and they will learn in Devanagari. And in the process, our older scripts got lost. I have some evidence of the scripts because my family left India 150 years back, and 140 maybe, and they still existed at that time. So you have a sense of how modern a lot of the changes are. And as for Hindi and Urdu being split, linguists don't consider them different because the grammar is the same. And when I told you that if you change your clothes and wore a sari or wore jeans or something as a man, you would look different. You would give a different impression. You would be the same person. So that the differences between Hindi and Urdu are at the level of clothing, which is to say the script and a small number of words which only started coming in near the end of the Mughal era. Before that, the language was not important enough to have all these Persian words that were different. It was a colloquial language. So again, time matters. If something came into the language very recently versus coming a long time ago, it makes a different point about genetic relationships and so.